Welcome to another Travel Risk Management Solutions training session. In this module, under emergency situations, we're going to be covering demonstrations, mobs and riots. Word of caution first up is that this is not location specific. This is not intended for any one geographical location, continent or regional area. This is a whole of journey overview. This is very specific for both developed and developing countries, but it is not location specific. It does not substitute any local plans or any local planning. This is an overview introductory session only. First of all, what we're going to be covering in this particular module, the key elements of learning in this will be early warning and preparation as it relates to demonstrations, riots and mobs, the difference between developed and developing countries, the escalation and violence of potential situations resulting from riots, demonstrations and mobs, and last but not least, priority actions in the event of such demonstrations, riots and mobs. So first of all, let's look at early warning. Early warning in particular is where most demonstrations, riots and mobs are predicated by some degree of early warning. These are often in the form of announcements. Announcements it could be in open press, it could be through community release, it could be a long simmering issue, but predominantly many of these situations where we see large bodies of individuals or issue motivated groups collecting together is predicated by some degree of announcement. Now, some of these announcements are in the public space, some of these announcements are available, but more clandestine or more spontaneous events, particularly through the use of social networks, community networks and so on, you may simply not be aware of some of these announcements, but they are predicated, depending on the monitoring surveillance in place, by some degree of precautionary event or announcement. Then deployments on both sides. This is the deployments of demonstrators, the deployments of supporting elements, the deployments in particular of government forces, government agencies, emergency services in preparation, because again they can often act as a litmus test. If they're preparing as a result of an ongoing issue or a spontaneous issue, they may start to pre-position their resources. In many developing countries you may see this in the form of armoured vehicles and tanks and soldiers and so on. Any deployments by either side can be a predicator for an escalation in a gathering such as a mob or a demonstration before any indication of violence is evident or likely. Gatherings in particular, smaller clusters, whilst not one single group, this could be a single of clusters at religious icons, it could be at focal points, it could be at the sites of incidents, it could be a culmination of several or multiple sites that will ultimately move to a single gathering location. And this could be anywhere from a government location to a palace, to a community centre, to a scene of previous violence, a whole host of other things, but they will eventually come together. And then of course streets, the complete absence of anybody on the streets. It's often a very good indicator that even if none of the above have occurred or you're simply unaware of anything, if the streets are eerily empty, if there is an absence of individuals, and this can lead to such things as a pending natural disaster, for example, but predominantly in an area where you would expect or you have experienced busy streets, commercial activities, street side stalls, vendors and activities, if it is devoid or significantly reduced, you need to be aware to the potential for the escalation of a demonstration or some sort of alternate gathering. Remembering that such things can also be the result of public holidays. They could be school events, they could be other community processes, so don't simply think the worst, but certainly be prepared that this is one of the key indicators for the onset of a problematic event through demonstrations and gatherings. Next, we look at the main differences between developed and undeveloped countries. They're distinctly different in the sense that how communities respond and how they conduct themselves, as well as how the government forces or government agents are likely to act as well. It's a key point of difference that people need to understand, that where they originate from and where they are travelling to or where they are at the point of an event is simply not a good sense or a litmus test to determine how they should behave in these circumstances. So first of all, the culture. In some cultures, Demonstrations and gatherings are a community spirit. They're almost a team sport. They happen regularly. It's a freedom of speech. It's a way of communications, and a lot of people like to get involved. Now, many of these may be peaceful. They may be just purely obstructionist, but many of them, alternatively too, the only time they have demonstrations or they come together as a mob, there is going to be an onset of violence. Now, this is not only from the community side, but this could also be from the government sides as well. So it's important to understand the local context in which you will be exposed under those circumstances. The local forces in particular, their track record of handling, their ability, the equipment they have, their involvement, their objectivity, their passion related to it. There's a whole lot of other elements that relate to the difference between developed countries and underdeveloped countries, in the sense that developed countries will typically have a degree of objectivity. They will act on behalf of the government. They will act on behalf of the community. Sometimes the local forces themselves may be part of the overall demonstrations and possibly capitulate and lead to violence and violent confrontations. Or there may be a crossing of the fence, so to speak, from one group to another. So it's important to understand that they will not be the same as they would be in a more disciplined, more controlled, more constrained community environment typical of developed countries as opposed to developing countries, and they could simply deteriorate quite quickly, or what you may see to be a violent or energetic process is simply the way of the local communities. The actions in which they perform. Some of these local forces and communities, again, may be quite used to throwing chairs, bricks, spears, setting fire, shooting, all sorts of things on both sides. This may simply be the normal process for them. Now, if you've come from an environment where you're not familiar with that, and under any circumstances being exposed to that is hazardous and potentially very, very dangerous. However, that could be the natural play of how these events take place. In some countries, every single demonstration event they have results in fatalities, results in deaths. But in the grand scheme of things, the communities simply take it as part and parcel of the process. And the impact that it has on the environments in developed communities and developed countries, the impact's often limited to immediate services, such things as getting access to ATMs, shops being open, and typical traffic disruptions or diversions. In developing countries, it can be much, much more problematic. It can mean an overwhelming of the medical services. It can mean a lack of accommodation. It can mean a complete lack of transport. It can mean complete failing in electricity, water, and a whole host of other things. You need to anticipate and be prepared that the scale of a demonstration activities in developing countries can be far more widespread than the local area in which one group or groups could be clustered. Moving on to the escalation and the potential for violence. In particular, you need to be aware of gatherings and groups that are predominantly all males. Males between approximately 16 to 40 years of age typically indicates an escalation or a particular objective that is diverse or detached from that of a political or influencing process. Concealment. That is when individuals seek to conceal their face. They're wearing motorbike helmets, balaclavas, some sort of coverings, veils. They're obviously trying to conceal their identities because what they're about to do they don't wish to be prosecuted for later on. So it's important to look for these particular signs. If it's a predominantly male demographic, they're starting to cover their face, they're hiding behind buildings, they're trying to conceal their intentions and their activities. This is a typical environment in which you need to rapidly and quickly make an assessment and remove yourself from those circumstances because it has a far greater potential for escalation and violence. Weapons. Now, weapons don't necessarily mean guns and knives and machetes and those sorts of things. It can be readily available weapons, ones that they may set fire to vehicles, the ability to pull up cobblestones or pavings off the road, sticks, stones, trees, all sorts of things, fence posts, palings, any of those sorts of things that they can pull out of the ground that they can expedite the process to use as ready-made weapons. And you need to look around you because in these types of environments they can quickly go from an unarmed mob to an armed, angry, violent mob that will then use the first available tools and implements as a process of weapons, and then second and third processes such as firebombs and weapons, guns and knives will then arrive in due course, but these are the more immediate and expedient weapons that they can get their hands on. And any other triggers. There could be a shooting, there could be an announcement, there could be something internally, there could be a key figurehead that's been targeted, there could be a whole host of other things that could take a relatively peaceful process and quickly turn it on its side. A vehicle running into a group of individuals, a collapsing of a stage, a whole host of other things that incites a mob mentality and drives people to extraordinary responses, drives them to extraordinary engagement, and can certainly lead to stressing of the local forces and agencies, but it can also trigger escalation of moving towards a more violent route. So what are the first things that we need to do, the priority actions, when we've identified and we've observed and we start to see the situation evolve? The first thing we need to do is seek cover. This is cover from concealment and cover from potential weapons. And what that means is if someone can't see you, particularly in a line of sight, if it's a long, wide, expansive road or it's simply a main thoroughfare, you need to seek angles. You need to be at right angles. You need to seek cover behind trees, bushes, move indoors, move down an alternate street. Be careful that you don't go from the frying pan to the fire and move into a less savoury neighbourhood, or you get by yourself and you expose yourself to petty crimes and criminals, but you need to seek cover. So if you are in an environment where you need to be unobserved, then you need to move at right angles or alternate directions from both the demonstrators as well as the local forces. Don't assume and immediately run towards the local forces. Certainly don't move quickly, because you could be assumed as being a police spy by the demonstrators, and you could be seen as an agitator and a violent offender to the local forces if you simply run towards them as well. Do not assume intuitively that you can simply run to either party. Move to the side. Also, if there's journalistic cover, keep away from the journalists, because journalists can quickly be misidentified as combatants or violent offenders because of the way their cameras are positioned. To some people, in an instance, they can look like weapons. So don't take photos, move away, seek cover. If there is some sort of firearms, if there is some sort of shooting, seek cover that is approximately no less than from the tip of your fingers to the tip of your elbow. It should be somewhere in the vicinity of about a metre thick. These will give you relatively good protection from small arms fire, from guns and pistols and those sorts of things. The next is distance. First of all, you need to seek cover, then you need to seek distance. Move away from the affected area. Most demonstrations and riots and processes are contained. They don't affect the entire country. They certainly don't affect entire cities. They often are contained to intersections, main thoroughfares, or areas of political leverage where they can best communicate, they can gather, or they can simply do damage and confront the local forces. So move away. Make an assessment. Once you've sought cover and you've moved away, make an assessment of the situation. Is this something that now affects your entire journey? Is this something that is going to impact on your immediate life safety and security? What are your most important actions that you need to do now? Is it getting dark? Do you need transport? Where is your hotel? Where is your accommodation? Where is the office? Make an assessment before you do anything first. Make sure you do the preliminary seeking cover, seek distance, then make a preliminary assessment. And it's important to stop and force yourself to do this so you simply don't go running about and create a greater drama and a greater problem for yourself. And then last is communications. Communications, engage, find out what's going on, report in, seek advice, seek support, make sure that people know where you are, whether you're affected or non-affected, and this goes for all stages as well. If you're simply not affected, but there is one of these riots, mobs and demonstrations in your vicinity, then assume that somebody thinks you're affected until proven otherwise. Make sure that you communicate. Communicate if you require support, communicate to your accommodation, communicate to transport. Make sure that you're able to communicate. Now, remembering cell phone technologies are not as advanced in developing countries, and cell phone technology may be a point of interdiction by local forces. They may shut it off, it may be overwhelmed, it may be a means of communicating through the groups. Just be aware that your communications platform could be affected if you're solely relying on mobile phone technology. Bear in mind also that in those types of environment, crimes of opportunity and petty crimes are quite prevalent as well. Be very careful of pulling out an expensive high-end smartphone in a developing country, because despite you being non-affected, you could be targeted because of the priority, valuable and attractive items that you're carrying, and your phone is certainly one of them. Okay, so in this module, what we've covered essentially is early warning and preparation, the cornerstone to avoiding 90% of these types of environments that will affect your life safety and security. The difference between developed and developing countries when it comes to mobs, riots and demonstrations. The escalation and the approach to violence, in particular physical violence. And those priority actions in which you should undertake to ensure and preserve and mitigate any associated risk to you and your activities. Just to reiterate, the company priority under these circumstances are the safety of the individual comes first, then the security of assets and valuables owned by the company, any and all business activities, and last, any business associated travel. These are the priorities. Act with your safety and the security of assets at a paramount of importance before you think of the impact and concerns it may have to the business. In order to implement effective travel risk management and hazard identification, it's predicated by plans and planning to each and every location in which you will be traveling or which you find yourself as a business traveler. Next, it's continuous management and monitoring of the circumstances, situations and the local environment to ensure that you're not unnecessarily exposed to developing or continuous hazards. And last, the ability to reach and respond with support resources. The ability to locally, regionally or internationally provide support to an individual who may be affected and requires assistance under certain circumstances. Priority contact details for any and all health, safety and security contact by phone, by email. Travel management and administrative operations contact phone and email. For any further questions related to this or the overall training modules, please contact the Human Resources Department, points of contact displayed here. In this session, we've covered emergency situations and we're focused on demonstrations, mobs and riots.